I beg to move that this House do now adjourn.
The question is that this House do now adjourn. Simon Hall.
Thank you very much indeed, Madam Deputy Speaker. And what a delectable, delicious prospect we have before us about a 2.5-hour adjournment debate on postal voting. If the whips thought the honourable gentleman from Ashton-under-Lyne made a long speech, I'm tempted to say you ain't seen nothing yet. First of all, Madam Deputy Speaker, may I welcome the Minister to her place and assure her from the start that this is not an attack adjournment debate. It really is designed to be, hopefully, helpful to her and colleagues. And Madam Deputy Speaker, I sought to secure this debate, having reflected upon the operation of postal voting during the general election. I did it with the prism as being the then Minister in charge of elections policy. But also I note, Madam Deputy Speaker, just for the record, that Mr Speaker has very kindly recently invited me to join his committee on the Electoral Commission, and I have accepted that. If the House would indulge me for just a moment, I would just like to put on record one of those things that when ministers are ushered out of office by the electorate often don't get noted. But this place, and all of us returned to it, and all who stood representing their party interests across the United Kingdom, and all of our electorates owe some debts of thanks. And I start by, and I see one or two of them in the officials' box, but the then DLUC elections team, who worked flat out to deliver the policies that came from the Elections Act, and who of course had the local elections in May and then the general election shortly thereafter. They worked tirelessly to support the delivery of those elections, and I put on record my thanks to them. I also want to thank David Gold and his team of the Royal Mail and all of the people in the Royal Mail who strove so hard to deliver the postal votes and all of the other literature and documentation which is entailed to support the delivery of a general election. David and his team were more than generous with their time, and during the election campaign, as issues were coming to the fore, which they were trying to manage and we were trying to raise as the then government, they made themselves available, if necessary, on a daily and certainly on a weekly basis to make sure that the ship of state was still afloat. Remiss also to thank the Association of Electoral Administrators and all of those in local government who keep the electoral register, who deal with all the paperwork, who deal with all the logistics, which certainly became more complex and more demanding as the Minister doubtless will have been briefed by her officials as a result of the Elections Act with changes to the rules and the regulations. I had the very great honour of speaking at their annual conference earlier this year. I'm sure the Minister will be invited to do it. If she can, I would urge her to do so, because they are a great bunch of women and men who work tirelessly in our town halls and county halls in order to make sure that elections are delivered. And of course we should thank the Electoral Commission, who are the guardian watchdog, who keep an eye over all of us to make sure that the rules are adhered to. Madam Deputy Speaker, our democracy works only when and because the defeated and their supporters accept the result. Not the victors, but the defeated. And we saw the dangers of that in the previous American presidential election, of just how close you can get to anarchy and a complete collapse of confidence, the ramifications in the states which are still being felt when people who lose say we was robbed, the system was against us. And we have been hugely lucky in this country that all of our election results have been beyond challenge, have been accepted by victor and defeated, and the legitimacy of those who have been chosen to govern is accepted and agreed. But we cannot rest on our laurels. We cannot just presume that because that is how it has always been, it always will be. And it was that spur that prompted me to apply for this adjournment debate today. And my message to the Minister is that 2029 seems a long way away. In governance and organisational terms, it's effectively tomorrow. And the government needs to, this House needs to think about how, if any changes are to be delivered to how postal voting operates, will be delivered either with amendments to the Elections Act, statutory instruments or whatever, in order to ensure that the legitimacy of the result is accepted by the electorate. And it's not as if the next general election will be fought, one presupposes this, but will be fought on the same franchise that we had this year. We have an ageing population. The legitimate presumption would therefore have to be that there would be a higher demand for postal votes as people get older. There is the potential to increase the franchise by giving the vote to 16-year-olds. Again, that will be a future increase in demand potentially on postal votes. And I understand that there may very well be in trend proposals with regards to franchise rights for EU citizens. Again, that will be another demand. And I think try to remember this figure from memory, I think if all of those newly enfranchised overseas voters who hitherto had been exempted because of the 15-year cut-off point had registered to vote, and by definition would either be seeking a postal vote and or possibly a proxy vote, then the totality of additional voters coming onto the roll was round about 3 million. I don't know, and I don't know whether the Electoral Commission's report, which will be published in November of this year with regards to the operation of the election, I don't know what percentage of that 3 million actually got onto the register and had a vote. But as sure as eggs are eggs, as time goes by and their legitimacy to vote was accepted by my then shadow, the Honourable Member for Vauxhall, so there's going to be no change in policy there. One can only presume that of that 3 million, a greater percentage will apply for a vote as knowledge and understanding of their availability to secure it. Well, I'm tempted to say that an adjournment debate would not be an adjournment debate. It would fail the Trade Descriptions Act unless I gave way to the Honourable Gentleman for Stratford.
Can I commend the Honourable Gentleman for North Dorset for bringing this forward? He's absolutely right to bring this issue to the floor of the House for consideration by the Minister. Helpful contribution and intervention. The Honourable Gentleman is very knowledgeable in relation to Northern Ireland. We've had a postal vote system for some time, but the problem in the last election, if I can be helpful, Madam Deputy Speaker, is those who were taken ill very suddenly, the doctors from the hospitals could right away send a letter and they were accepted for a postal vote. Those who were in their 70s, late 70s and 80s, who were infirm and perhaps not as mobile and weren't able to get and needed postal votes, it seemed for some unknown reason, Madam Deputy Speaker, that GPs took a decision not to sign their forms for postal votes. To me, that's absolutely ludicrous. And it seems to me, if you're elderly and infirm and not able to get out, then you should get a postal vote. There isn't a two-tier status for those of postal votes to be helpful.
Well, I certainly agree with the Honourable Gentleman that all of those who are entrusted with the discharge and delivery of our elections, and our police and medical certifiers and others clearly play a part, should play a very active and engaged part. It shouldn't be an the option to opt out. It should just be an accepted part of the job. But I want to mention specifically Northern Ireland in a moment or so. But some facts provided by the Royal Mail, which I think are just of interest to sort of put into scope and scale. This general election just gone of July 24, the Royal Mail delivered more postal votes and candidate mail than in any previous general election. Postal votes were up by 50%, candidate literature up by 30% in comparison with 2019. And that was just your election literature, Madam Deputy Speaker. The Royal Mail delivered 50.8 million poll cards, 7.26 million postal votes, and 184 million candidate leaflets. The Royal Mail did sweeps of all of their 37 mail centres and 1,200 delivery offices in order to ensure that all of those postal votes which had gone within the system were swept up and delivered to the counts in order to make sure that those votes were counted. And on election day itself, 70,000 postal votes were handled by Royal Mail across the United Kingdom to be delivered. 70,000, that's a huge, huge number. And I think this is the challenge which I set to the Minister, and I'm not looking for the de facto answer today, but just an assurance that it's on the radar and people are thinking about it. Because we know full well, and I think we feel this particularly acutely in rural areas, the Royal Mail is going through a period of change. It is by definition, because of email and everything else, handling fewer and fewer letters, etc. Now, staff numbers reflect that. One of the joys, as far as the Royal Mail was concerned, for the 2015 general election, was the fact that we had the Fixed Term Parliament Act, so they could structure additional recruitment in order to deliver the demands, and that was a demand which was far less than that which prevails at the moment, because they knew with certainty when the general election was going to be held. The snap elections of 2017 and 2019, the earlier than possibly some people thought it might have been 2024 election, caught the Royal Mail napping in a way because they had that very sudden quick spurt to try to recruit people in order to deliver all of the pieces of paper that needed to be done. That is an issue in the absence of the Fixed Term Parliament Act, which is going to remain with us. It's a point I made to the Royal Mail, of course, that in actual fact only one election, which was controlled by the Fixed Term Parliament Act, every other election had always been at the whim of the prerogative of the Prime Minister when the House was dissolved. But of course, in comparing previous general elections with future, we have to overlay those changes in volumes that the Royal Mail are handling and therefore their difference in staff. And I did mention in rural areas, I'm still actually waiting for the delivery of Election Address 2. I'm sure I had very exciting words to say. It never came through my letterbox. Last week we had a wonderful bundle of 12 pieces of mail, but all delivered on one day in a one delivery a week service that we seem to be having at the moment in my particular part of North Dorset. And there won't be, I would suggest, a Member of Parliament, urban or rural, but particularly those in rural areas who haven't had constituents contact them post the general election to say, I didn't receive my postal vote in time, I couldn't get it back in time because of the time frames. And this takes me to a point which I do think possibly will require some secondary legislation or certainly some thought, which is the cut-off points between close of nominations, getting everything to the printer, then getting everything bundled up in the postal vote packs while still trying to update the register and everything else, while still trying to check that your polling stations are available, while still trying to recruit your polling clerks. It is all incredibly tight. And it was incredibly tight this year, but it just about coped. My anxiety is for future-proofing with that increased demand, Madam Deputy Speaker, which I mentioned at the start of my remarks. Now, the government could change this by going back to the old system, putting the postal vote genie back in the bottle, and limiting it to the very tight criteria that used to prevail. I don't think that's going to happen. I don't think it would be desirable. One could introduce digital voting for overseas voters, but of course that has the possibility to be subject to fraud and hacking. It also then, of course, opens up the Pandora's box of digital voting for everybody in the United Kingdom as well. There isn't an easy solution to this. It's the tightness of the timetables, it's the capacity of the Royal Mail, not the goodwill of the Royal Mail, The Royal Mail are honoured and delighted to have the contract which the government gives it. And David Gold and his team were forever conscious and were always prepared to say up front they were absolutely persuaded of the important role, the pivotal role that they played, the organisation played, in delivering the general election. The Electoral Commission, in a briefing given to me today, in advance of this debate, for which I'm grateful, noted that a number of people experienced problems voting by post, delays receiving their postal ballot back. Their research, and I'm grateful for this, shows that the vast majority of postal votes were delivered promptly and there were no widespread or systemic issues. However, there were voters both in the UK and abroad who could not vote because of the late arrival of postal votes. Problems were prevalent in Scotland. Scotland gave us quite a lot of concern because, of course, the election coincided with the school holidays. It also coincided, of course, with the school holidays in Northern Ireland, which presented some additional pressure to the postal voting system. And I look forward, as I'm sure the Minister does, to seeing the Electoral Commission's report into postal voting to be published next month. So something needs to be done to give us all confidence that the result of the general election 2029, arguably, will have the legitimacy of that which was held in 2024, 2019 and prior. So there will be some challenges there. Because our constituents, whilst not forced to vote, do, I think, have a legitimate expectation as part of their contract relationship with the state that if they wish their vote to be counted, then it should be counted if it has been cast. So I don't have the answers to the Minister. That's her job now, not mine. The system she knows needs to be reliable, it needs to be robust, it needs to be easy, it needs to be seamless, and it needs to be trusted. Because all of us, irrespective of party, irrespective of geography, are motivated in unity, surely, Madam Deputy Speaker, by one guiding principle, that the result, whatever it may be, has to command the authority of trust that the electorate have given it. Yeah. When it doesn't, when people can cry foul, when people can say the system is loaded against them or is just too creaky, analogue for a digital age, if you will, faith in our democratic system erodes. And when faith erodes, participation is likely to decline. And when that declines, the extremes will always flourish. That is the situation which I know His Majesty's Government and the Minister will not want to see. I look forward with interest to what the Minister has to say, and for what it is worth, with my experience of being the Minister over the sort of election period, if there's anything I can do with her to sort of, in conversation, etc., to make sure that we get this right for 2029. Before I'm just finishing, but my honourable friend, of course.
I thank my honourable friend for giving way, and he's made a very interesting and powerful speech. Reference was made to the number of items delivered by Royal Mail and so on, and yes, they're going through a period of change. Does he think that, does my honourable friend think that, in actual fact, we need to be looking for alternatives to that because of the major changes that are taking place?
If my honourable friend means alternatives of feet
to the Royal Mail.
Feet on the pavements,
Yeah.
Then very possibly. What I think the benefit of having the Royal Mail is that culturally they are aware of the seriousness of the task which they are asked to discharge. And they have a very good heritage in doing so. So I wouldn't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater, but I do sympathise with them that when in essence you are given 5 weeks to recruit sometimes hundreds of people across the country to literally deliver stuff, to learn the rounds, and they also have to be vetted, of course, to make sure that they are not politically partial, that my leaflets don't end up in a hedge. and everybody else's ends up through people's letterboxes. These are important things. There's a tendency just to rush off into the commercial sector. There are, of course, ways that you could put in vetting and so on and so forth, but I think the authority and the imprimatur that the Royal Mail has puts it at a very distinct advantage, and I know that they want to continue, not just because it's a commercially attractive contract which they have with the Minister and the Department, but because they see themselves as being part of that democratic fabric and network which sustains the elections, which is why I thought I could have waited to raise this debate in 2027. And then the Minister would say, oh yes, the Honourable Gentleman for North Dorset makes some very valid points, but he will know that there is no time in the legislative timetable in order to address this. We're just going to have to try and muddle through. She has at least got a few years to talk to PBL, to talk to her whip, to talk to the Leader of the House, to come to that assessment if tweaks and changes need to be made to the Elections Act with regards to cut-off points and timetables, in order, as I say, I'm not going to labour the point any further, that the trust and the robustness of the electoral process and the outcomes can be trusted by all of our citizens, irrespective of whether they voted or indeed how they voted.
Clara Ali.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I want to start by thanking the Honourable Member and former Minister for securing this debate and bringing this very important topic of elections to the attention of the House. I particularly welcome his expertise and experience that he's brought to this discussion and at the beginning of this Parliament for the very reasons he's pointed out, which is extremely helpful in light of his role in the previous government as the Minister for Elections. The effective running of our electoral processes is the foundation of our democracy, and it is right that we carefully monitor and review all aspects of delivery to identify emerging issues and areas for improvement. I want to express my gratitude to all those who've worked tirelessly to deliver the recent general election, returning officers, electoral registration officers, and their teams across our country. This is an important debate in the context of an election that was delivered effectively, where voters could exercise their rights, and we as a country have collective confidence in the result. And while there will always be lessons to be identified and improvements to be made, Madam Deputy Speaker, the success of the polls should not be taken for granted or go unacknowledged. And I would also like to thank the wider sector that has supported them: printers, suppliers, the Royal Mail, the police and the Electoral Commission. And of course, this has included the tireless work of the Honourable Member for North Dorset, who deserves great credit for effectively marshalling government resources to aid the delivery of this complex operation. This government is aware of the reports in the media of postal vote delays at the general election and the points that the Honourable Member has made. And while the vast majority were delivered successfully, in an operation of this scale and complexity, there were issues with the proportion of these postal votes which encountered delays, despite the work that was done by the Minister and others ahead of the general election. This has been, of course, the case in previous elections too, with officials working closely with Royal Mail and returning officers to support the resolution of these issues as quickly and as effectively as possible. But any instance where an elector has been unable to vote due to delays or errors in the system is deeply regrettable, and we need to take steps to address the root causes. Postal votes, Madam Deputy Speaker, postal voting, as the Honourable Member pointed out, has become increasingly popular, with a general trend towards more of the electorate choosing this voting option. At 2019, at the general election, over 8 million postal votes were issued, and reports suggest the figure for 2024 was significantly higher. That put printing and delivery systems under strain, as has been pointed out, especially in national polls and elections called at short notice. And of course, there was the backdrop of boundary changes as well. While we recognise no system will be perfect at all times, it's clear from the volume of incidents and the feedback from the election sector and electors themselves, there are major strains on the system and improvements need to be made. We will carefully assess the postal voting process as part of our wider review of electoral conduct and registration processes, which the government has already begun. We will be working closely with stakeholders across the sector to gather their feedback, analysis and ideas. And I'm very grateful to the former Minister for his offer of assistance, because this is incredibly important, and I'd be very keen to make sure we draw on his expertise and his work. The Electoral Commission will be publishing their final report, as he's mentioned, on the general election later this year, and we will carefully consider these findings and recommendations. I give way to the honourable member.
I'm very grateful to the honourable lady for not what she's saying, but also her very kind words. You've made a former minister blush, so thank you. In the conversations which she is having with the sector, and she knows that those are vital conversations, will she be overlaying the projected figures for the franchise, for the electors, for the next election, or will she be using the 2024 figures? Because clearly, if the changes which government have suggested are delivered, the franchise itself is going to be larger. And I think that's just an important point. I'd just like clarity. I'm guessing I know the answer, but
I'm grateful to the honourable gentleman. We will look at these issues in the round, and he's made in his speech really important points about the growth in this sector, and I'll come on to that. Returning to the Electoral Commission report, and we will look at those findings when they arrive. And once we've completed our own review, we will be bringing forward firm proposals for changes and improvements to our electoral system, and I look forward to discussing it with the honourable member and other members who have an interest in this this topic. The honourable member also raised concerns about, in relation to, while recognising, of course, we recognise the important work the Royal Mail has done in relation to the work that was carried out. And of course, we will need to look at, in the context of the Royal Mail's parent company and potential takeover, any wider implications to make sure that the system is robust and there is the appropriate support to make sure that for future elections, Royal Mail not only is it in a position to learn and build on and improve on what was done in these recent elections, that the resources are in place to ensure that we can continue to maintain confidence. And he makes a very important point in relation to rural areas as well. So those factors need to be taken into consideration, along with the earlier point he made. The honourable member raised important points about an ageing population and demographic changes, as well as younger voters and preferences in terms of how people will increasingly wish to vote, and future work in this context needs to take into account how patterns of behaviour and voting will change. And as I said, I look forward to working with him on these important issues. There are, of course, there was a point made in relation to the intervention that the honourable member for Strangford made in relation to Northern Ireland, and on checking. The Northern Ireland office has heard of GPs not signing off postal votes, but it's never been backed by specific evidence. But of course, it is an area that we will take into account and look into, and any other barriers that might exist to those who need to and wish to vote through postal ballots. So, in the spirit of the consensus that the former Minister, the Honourable Member, has held this debate and his speech. I look forward to working closely with him. I want to thank him for securing this very important debate today and for the interventions that other members have made and contributing their insights and expertise. The government considers the effective running of elections to be of paramount importance and fundamental to trust and confidence in our democracy, Madam Deputy Speaker. As the government announced earlier this month, we are carefully reviewing electoral conduct and registration processes. Once this review has been completed, the government will bring forward firm proposals for changes where they are necessary, and I very much look forward to sharing these proposals with members and working with the Honourable Member. Thank you.
The question is that this House do now adjourn. As many as of that opinion say aye. Aye. The ayes have it. Order, order.